Oystein Aarseth, better known as Euronymous, was a questionable man with a very questionable past. And in fact, some of his decisions were borderline psychotic. But when his body was found outside of his home in August of 1993, his friends, family and fans were all shocked. But the craziest part of this story isn't actually about Oystein. It's about his perpetrator, and the deluded monster that he eventually became. This case is a strange journey through the realm of an often misunderstood subculture, and the events that were so catastrophic that they permanently scarred the black metal community's reputation. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening folks. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to another video by Coffeehouse Crime. Today we're looking at the case of Euronymous. And of course, just to let you know that I post solved, unsolved and strange cases here weekly. So if that's your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to Coffeehouse Crime. Now I probably don't need to tell you this, but please go grab yourself a coffee, take a seat and sit back. This is the case of Euronymous. Good evening, or assimilating to our location today, Gokvel. Our story today takes us to a country rarely covered here on Coffeehouse Crime. Welcome to the beautiful northern land of Norway. Known for its breathtaking fjords, beautiful waterfalls, and striking mountainous terrain, Norway's natural beauty is both expansive and endless. Now of course, we do have to mention one of the country's most famous features. It's one of the best places in the world to catch a glimpse of the ever-dazzling northern lights. And, personally speaking, another very interesting thing about Norway is its Doomsday Vault. Up in the isolated region of Svalbard, Norway has an underground vault that contains over 900,000 varieties of seeds from all over the world. And that's just in case, well, you know what could happen. Norway is a country that should be on everyone's bucket list. It blends beauty alongside darkness. And the land of the midnight sun is a pretty metal nickname for a country too. This brings us to the subject of today's case. We begin our story in 1968, and alongside the western coast of Norway lies the municipality of Sørdal. This is where Helge and Inga Aarseth would welcome their son Oystein Aarseth into the world. So Oystein was born one of two children, but due to the controversial events that you will soon discover, his brother has been kept anonymous to this very day. Not too much is known about Oystein in his earlier years, but he was known to be quiet and sensitive, and did rather well throughout his elementary school years. This calm temperament carried on into high school, where he was modest, mild-tempered, and seemed to maintain his focus on his studies. And towards the end of high school, Oystein was achieving top grades with relative ease. But in 1984, when his final exams came around, he didn't bother to attend them. Deciding that school wasn't for him, he instead formed a band with two friends, Jorn Stubberud and Kjetil Mannheim. And between the three of them, they formed the band Mayhem. At least for Oystein, his lifelong dream of forming a black metal band simply couldn't wait. And so, unfortunately, putting all of his eggs in one basket, he left school for good. The band may have only been three young men, but they worked hard to create an image for themselves. They would advertise themselves as dark, strange and macabre. And 2 years after its creation, Mayhem would release their first album on cassette tape, which was named, Pure Fucking Armageddon. To further strengthen their deathly facade, the band members adopted stage names. Oystein became known as Euronymous, while Jorn gave himself the violent name of Necrobutcher. As for Kjetil, he left the band shortly after their first album, which then prompted the last two remaining members to welcome two more to the squad. New vocalist Per Ollen gave himself the rather simple nickname of Dead. And to replace the missing drummer, Jan Axel Blomberg joined with the nickname Hellhammer. All of Mayhem's members took their alter egos very seriously. They soon began to talk, perform and even behave like them. Now, this does hold some very grave consequences, so moving forward, I'll be using their stage names to address them. Euronymous, Dead and Hellhammer were living in a small house up in the woodlands. They dubbed this place the Hen House, where they could be as loud and reckless as they wanted for their rehearsals. When the band was created, the Norwegian black metal scene was fairly small, but as Mayhem's years making music progressed, they tried to set a new standard of how bands should portray themselves. You see, Euronymous hated how supposedly fake the scene was. Although other bands sang about Satanism, hating Christianity, violence and death, none of them ever acted on what they sang about, and it was all just a dark fantasy to them. So in short, they were all technically doing the opposite of virtue signalling. Euronymous was a theistic Satanist, meaning that he believed in Satan as a real and existing deity. He claimed that he believed that pain and misery should be spread, and to add to this, he was extremely misanthropic, meaning that he had a burning hatred for the human race. He also despised Christianity, which was strange but not unusual, and although he was raised as a Christian by his parents, they did let him leave the church when he was 15 years old, so there was no real reason for him to feel this way. His particularly edgy and dark attitude often got on the nerves of those around him as well. This included other members of the band, as the henhouse had its fair share of tensions after moving in. Both Euronymous and Dead would often clash, and one night, Dead would even leave the house to sleep alone in the woods so he could get away from Euronymous and his overly loud music. Sadly, there were much bigger problems. Dead unfortunately suffered from mental health issues, which included depression. And sadly, this would lead to his tragic death in April of 1991. It was during that month that Euronymous had returned home after running some errands, and after opening the front door, he noticed blood throughout the property. Following the trail, it led to Dead's bedroom. And sadly, it is here that he found the body of his own friend, who tragically had taken his own life. He had cut himself open before taking a shotgun slug to the head. However, instead of grieving over the loss of a close friend, or even calling the police or an ambulance, Euronymous embarked on a very dark path. He left the house and bought a camera. Returning to the house, he then rearranged Dead's body and placed items around him to create a rather dramatic looking scene. He then took photographs to save for himself later, and trust me, it gets even worse. Euronymous then excitedly called the remaining housemate Hellhammer to tell him what had happened. He found it very cool that Dead was now dead, but Hellhammer was of course distraught and furious. Euronymous then collected parts of his friend's skull and turned them into necklaces, and over the following years he gave these necklaces to anyone he deemed worthy. However, the worst part to all of this is that, shockingly, he had used one of the photos he had taken as an album cover to his new record. To this day, it is still used for their album cover The Dawn of Black Hearts, and it's heavily cited as one of the darkest album covers in history. Now I wish I could say that this was the end of our story, but in truth we are only getting started, as eventually our rather brash and violent Euronymous would actually become the victim. Jorns Jubberud, who was also known as Necrobutcher, believes that Euronymous' actions were a way of coping after seeing the death of his friend. To add to this, he also believes that this is when Euronymous had changed, and fully became the persona that he portrayed. With his vile actions, Euronymous drove a strong rift between many of his current friends, and in the process, he would also lose Necrobutcher to the band. From here on out, the black metal scene in Norway became more macabre, and more about Satanism, misanthropy, and evil. Euronymous started encouraging and sensationalizing the topics in which the band sang about, and this in turn would also partially change the black metal scene forever. In the year of 1991, and to further his own vision for black metal, he opened a record store named Helvette, which, if you're wondering, is the Norwegian word for hell. You can probably guess what it looked like, but the internal walls were painted in black, adorned with medieval weapons, pentagrams, and other items perceived to be macabre. The shop also had a large basement where members of the community could hang out. The basement actually became a very popular meeting place, and quickly gained popularity in the scene. The shop can still be visited to this day, and in fact, many fans make the pilgrimage to take pictures in the basement. So anyway, during his first year of owning Helvette, Euronymous also created his own record label, which was named Death Like Silence Productions. He would take many bands under his wing, often promoting them if they had the same vision as his own. And one of these artists, who, by the way, is crucial to this case, is Varg Vikernes. Varg was 5 years younger than Euronymous. He fit in very well with the scene, and alongside his own music, Varg became the new bass guitarist for Mayhem. The band tended to cycle through members quite frequently, and was rather turbulent with its lineup. And although the relationship between Varg and Euronymous was amicable at first, this sadly wouldn't last. Soon after this, it developed into some kind of rivalry, all about who could be the most shocking and provocative. Now, Euronymous did not like this at all. He enjoyed having the spotlight all to himself, and he was obsessed with the attention and showmanship of it all. In fact, their rivalry would put the black metal community right into the public light in June of 1992, when the Fantoft stage church near Bergen suddenly caught on fire. Being built in the 12th century, the whole church was made of wood, and therefore was not fireproof, and initially it was suspected to have been a lightning strike. But later in the investigation, it was concluded to have been an act of arson, an action that was later revealed to have been Varg, and his motive to support the black metal ideologies of Satanism. Later on, a photo of the burnt remains of the chapel eventually became the cover of one of Varg's solo albums. The album was named Aske, which fittingly translates to ashes. And of course, the media stereotyped this, stigmatizing all black metalers as violent Satan worshippers, when actually, these acts are only done by an extreme fringe of the community. The burning of Fantoft Stage Church sparked a spree of church burnings across the country, all of which were done to promote the image of black metal. Varg was present at many of these burnings, and as for Euronymous, we know he attended at least one of them. Shortly after these burnings, both Varg and Euronymous organised an interview with a Christian news reporter, where Varg then attempted to paint the black metal community as the enemy of Christianity. Varg would even go on to claim that he'd killed a man a few years prior in Lillehammer. However, even to this day, it is still yet to be proven. Obvious to say, but their goal for this interview was to both shock and scare people as much as possible. In order to attract more customers to Helvette, they dishonestly spread violent rumours about black metal. And although it is arguably obvious that some of their claims and statements were exaggerated and fake, the media always ran with any sensationalized stories that they could print. After all, shock value is rather appealing to the wider market. This outwardly violent and satanic image of black metal divided the community, and many of those in the scene preferred it when it was smaller and out of the public eye. However, very little did they know that shortly after this, the black metal community would once again be thrust into the public spotlight for all the wrong reasons. By August of 1993, the fire between Euronymous and Varg had burned to a newfound heat. Varg's solo albums had started to sell relatively well, and Euronymous, who was his record label, owed him quite a lot of money in royalties. To add to this financial tension, the competitive behaviour between both men had heightened, and after Varg's previous church-burning antics, Euronymous knew it was going to be hard to top him. It was at this moment that Varg learned of a rather concerning rumour. A mutual friend who was also close to Euronymous had warned him that he was in danger, and apparently, Euronymous was planning to do something horrific to Varg. He was told that Euronymous planned to stun him with a stun gun, tie him up, and then drag him out to the middle of the woods, where he would then torture Varg to death. And allegedly, this would be done to create the black metal scene's first documented snuff film. Now, Varg wasn't going to believe this at face value, as verbally speaking, Euronymous liked to blow a lot of smoke, but there was rarely any fire. He was all about image and playing his character. However, if Euronymous' plans were actually true, then obviously this would hold massive consequence for Varg. So moving forward, he leaned on the safe side of cautious. And then, on the 10th of August 1993, came a rather suspicious request. Euronymous asked Varg if he could drop off some unsigned contracts at his place, possibly so he could finally get Varg the royalties and money that he was owed. Varg became extremely suspicious over this, as usually all formalities would be done in the shop. So why was he asking to meet in private? And why out of hours? To add to this, Euronymous was apparently acting rather strangely too. Maybe perhaps he had heard that Varg was scheming something. Either way, on that night, it seemed that the pair knew that one of them was not going to walk away alive. Pulling up outside of Euronymous' apartment, lighting a cigarette, Blackthorn stayed outside of the apartment while Varg, with contracts in hand, made his way up to Euronymous' front door. Upon entering, a stoic conversation between the two began. But when Varg raised his arm to hand Euronymous the contract, Euronymous panicked, and in return kicked him square in the chest. Turning on his foot, Euronymous ran towards the kitchen to grab a knife, but somewhere along the way, a struggle between the two ensued. The pair were evenly matched, and with both men prepared to kill each other, it was anyone's guess who was going to come out victorious. Wrestling over a knife, Varg eventually snatched it out of Euronymous' hands, and now in control, he began to repeatedly strike him with it. Euronymous tried to run away, but with each step taken, he was met with another puncture wound to his body. But by the time he had reached his apartment's public stairwell, he tragically moved no more. Oystein Aarseth, better known as Euronymous, was dead at the age of 25. He had taken 2 stab wounds to the head, 5 to the neck, and 16 to the back. As expected, Varg fled the scene, where he then travelled back to Bergen to his apartment and lay low. And all in the meanwhile, it did not take long for Oystein's body to be found. As we all know, it was left in a public stairwell. Now at first, investigating officers had no idea who killed Oystein, but after speaking to friends and family and even some fans, they learned of the thick tension between him and Varg. And you can probably guess where this is going, because only 9 days later, Varg Vikernes was finally arrested for the murder of Oystein. Upon his arrest, police found over 150 kilograms of explosives in his flat that he shared with 2 other people, and of course one of them was Blackthorn. During his trial, which began on May 2nd, 1994, Varg argued that he was acting in self-defense and that Oystein had attacked him first. But Varg's defense was wholly rejected by the jury, and testimonies from those close to Varg claimed it was methodically planned murder. According to some close contacts, Varg and Blackthorn went to Oystein's apartment with the sole intention of killing him. Investigating officers also highlighted that their roommate stayed in the Bergen apartment to provide the other 2 with a solid alibi. We know this because this roommate rented movies and withdrew cash from Varg's credit card during the time of Euronymous' death. And so, no surprise, on the 19th of May 1994, after just 17 days of trial, Varg Vikernes was found guilty of murder, arson, theft, and the possession of explosives. As a result, he was sentenced to 21 years in prison, which is the maximum penalty one can serve in Norway. During this time in prison, Varg worked on a number of projects, which included the continuation of making music and writing a couple of books. And these books portrayed his religious and political views, which are very questionable. One was titled Varg's Speech, which told his side of the story and ultimately talked about his own worldviews. The other book was titled Teutonic Mythology and Worldviews. Varg was also obsessed with being Teutonic, which essentially is another word for Germanic. The word is often used by Nazis as an alternative to Aryan. And so, you won't be surprised to learn that Varg was actually a bona fide neo-Nazi through and through, hiding his dark behaviours and ideologies behind the front of paganism and Odinism. When Varg was released from prison in 2009, he began to spread these ideologies, which of course were both extremely xenophobic and racist. So much so that in the year 2014, he was charged by French authorities for inciting racial hatred against Muslims and Jews, all of which were written through articles on his blog. And blogs weren't the only place that Varg vented online. He once had a YouTube channel which amassed over 250,000 subscribers before being banned in 2019. And looking at some of his videos, it is quite clear to see why.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I promote traditionalism. But have I always been traditional? Was I traditional in my teens? Let's find out. The funny thing is that, yes, I was. I didn't drink myself into a stupor as a teenager. I didn't chase skirts. I was traditional, even when I was a teenager. So you were a girl with piercings. I lost all interest in you. So you were a girl with tattoos. I lost all interest in you. So you were a girl who slept with one of my friends to get to know me. Bad move. I have no interest in you. So you were a girl who got drunk. In some context. Sorry, not interested. So you were a girl who looked like a traditional metalhead. Sorry, I lost all interest in you. So you were a girl with a ring on your freaking thumb. No, I lost all interest in you, even there. Not gonna claim that I was the ideal teen, because I had some other issues. Authority issues, you could say, and some rebellious tendencies. But not in that context. I was very traditional, even as a teen. Bad guys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Let's find out.
It seems that, after his YouTube channel was terminated, he declared he was officially done with the internet. Which makes sense, as the man is very adamant to withhold his traditional values. All the more benefit to us, I suppose. Strangely enough, Varg also created his own tabletop board game, which was a fantasy role-playing game named Mayhem. This has some extremely questionable content, and I won't even bother going into this one. And all in the meanwhile, while Varg is now out in the real world, we can't forget that he took the life of Oystein Aarseth, a fellow band member, a son, a brother, and a friend. While Oystein was without a doubt not a good person, he was just a teenager when he began to act differently to those around him. During this time, he was in a particularly sensitive stage of his life for development, and no one is sure what quite went wrong. He disrespected his friends and peers to the extreme, and although it's never cool to be a douche, he did not deserve to have his life taken. Oystein wasn't always Euronymous, and there were times where he would just be his plain self. His family remember him as a sweet, well-mannered person. Oystein would often say to them that the press writes what they want. You and I know who I am. It was painful for his closest friends and family to read the newspapers after his passing, and only for them to see his fabricated evil persona, not the man they knew and loved. This day, there are still those that hail Oystein, or Euronymous, as one of the most influential people to have ever existed in the realms of metal music. And in fact, many look up to Euronymous as a forefather of everything black metal. While many don't necessarily miss him, or what he did in the past, he is sorely missed by his family, friends, peers, and of course his fans. So I'm ending this one slightly different to my usual, as in this instance both the victim and the perpetrator were not necessarily good people. But what are your thoughts on Euronymous? To add to this, what are your thoughts about his altercation with Varg? Do you think it was self-defense or stone-cold murder? Please of course let me know in the comments section down below. And thank you so much for watching another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. If you found this case interesting or you learned something new, then please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. Now as always, I'll see you again real soon for another video. But until that moment arrives, please remember to look after each other and stay safe. Thank you and goodbye.